Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily, the Fang girl. I'm currently based here in Singapore, and if you're watching this video, you're probably deciding whether you should live in Singapore or in San Francisco. So for some context, I have lived in San Francisco for 8 to 9 years roughly. I went to school there, I also worked there, I was working at big tech, working at a startup, and I kind of built my community in San Francisco. My family and all of my best friends currently live in the Bay Area, so I do have a deeply rooted connection to the Bay Area and just California in general. In January 2020, I moved to Singapore to kind of travel, but obviously that didn't happen. And so I kind of got stuck here in Singapore, wanted to stay, really scrambled to find a job, and now I'm working in fintech here in the city-state. My background has been kind of an interesting twist and turns, and I've been getting so many questions about whether people should work in Singapore or work in San Francisco, and I think objectively there's no right or wrong. However, I have my own opinions about certain things that I would love to share. So in general, in terms of career progression, I would say that both countries are really great places to start because, Silicon Valley, it's iconic. It's where some of the best tech companies have kind of sprung up from, like Facebook, Google, Apple, Netflix. Like all of these major tech companies have come from Silicon Valley. And to me, I think there is something that is really valuable in going to Silicon Valley and learning and meeting people within that area and growing your career there. I think Singapore is great also for tech. I would say it makes sense for people to kind of start their careers in San Francisco, build up their network and their connection and their experiences. And then I think the most strategic ploy or play would be to move to Singapore and become like a manager or like help expand an office somewhere, or bring your talents and skill sets to Singapore to have more impact. I think the job market in Singapore is very, very competitive, especially since, obviously Singapore is smaller than the US, and the people here in Singapore are brilliant and really hardworking. And in order for you to get an EP, an employment pass, I think generally they're looking for more skilled, seasoned professionals. So in that sense, I think it would really make sense for a person who wants to work in tech and like break into tech to perhaps maybe start their career or their tech experience first in San Francisco and then eventually find their way to Singapore. If you have Silicon Valley experience and you're able to bring a very fresh perspective to Singapore, then you as a person are just so much more valuable. I also start to see, though, in Singapore, a lot of great talented individuals are coming here to set up shop, to build their own companies, to become their own CEO or entrepreneur, and this comes from all over the world. There are more eyeballs kind of looking into Singapore as a space for venture capital, for growing their business or their startup, because I think in comparison, there are a lot more problems to solve in emerging markets, specifically within Southeast Asia, than compared to the US or Silicon Valley. To be honest, I think Silicon Valley still is quite saturated, but at least in Singapore, there is still a lot of opportunities for people to come in and solve real-world issues. Secondly, I think compensation is quite a big one, a big topic actually. So I think in the Bay Area, you can easily make six figures if you're, like maybe 2 years or 3 years out of college and you're working at a big tech company, depending on your negotiations and your job. Tech is really lucrative and they pay you very well, but that's also based on like cost of living and how much a city would cost. Obviously, San Francisco is so freaking expensive. Singapore is also very expensive, but I think to me, like if I were to compare the two, I think you get more bang for your buck to live in Singapore than compared to San Francisco. And to give you an example, I was paying roughly like $1,700 US in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with no amenities, and I was sharing a bathroom. And my room, it was like the same size as this right now. And then in Singapore, I have the master bedroom. I'm paying roughly like $1,000 US for a place that has amenities and it's gated. It has a pool and like a barbecue like roof deck. So a lot of things are really different. I will say though, in terms of income, one of the things that makes me a little bit hesitant to stay in Singapore long term is the thought of, like, if I were to go back to the Bay Area, I think I could be making more and probably saving more if possible, because I know that ultimately I think I'm going to end up in the Bay Area eventually and growing my roots there. So in terms of like translating my income back to the Bay Area, I think there's still a little bit of discrepancy. However, in Singapore, you can still make really good money if you're working in tech. And obviously I'm saving more and I'm, doing these side hustles. But I think in the Bay Area, if I were to translate my income back and build my life in the Bay Area, I do still need to, compensate and make more money to live a comfortable life in California. Obviously, this is subjective to each person, and I think that's just how I'm feeling at the moment. I feel like generally I'm pretty financially stable, but if I want to go back to the US, I think my cost of living will definitely be higher than my cost of living here in Singapore. One of the big differences too is like safety. So in Singapore, I've never felt uncomfortable. I've never felt unsafe. I've never had anyone steal anything from me. Literally, Singapore is the safest country in this world, and I do really appreciate that part. I think it's really sad to see San Francisco become just a ghost town, like a lot of crime happening, Asian American hate. All those stories that the elderly are getting attacked, like those stories are coming from the Chinatown of Oakland and San Francisco. Many of the stories are coming from, that space. And I think I do caution you, like if you are considering the two in terms of safety, as a female, I think you should take that in account as well. I think when I was living in San Francisco, I carried pepper spray. I was always looking over my back. I have been kind of like hit on my shoulder once by a homeless person. So I think I think if you're moving from Singapore to San Francisco, just be prepared that there are some things that you'll see or you'll encounter that you would have never encountered in Singapore. There's a level of like safety that you're really comfortable with here in the city-state, and then when you go to San Francisco, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. But given that as well, there's also a lot of color and arts and creativity that flourishes in a city like San Francisco. So yeah, just think about that. The other thing I would say as well, in terms of building communities, I think this one's interesting because I get a lot of questions about making friends with locals here in Singapore, making friends in San Francisco. So one thing I want to say is I don't know if it's because of the weather, but I feel like it's easier for me to make friends here in Singapore. People want to be out, people are friendlier. It's a very transient city here in Singapore, so you have a lot of expats who want to make friends, who want to have a feeling of belonging, and they're much more open to meeting new people. Whereas I felt like in the Bay Area, it was super homogenous. Everyone worked in tech. You weren't really that interesting. A lot of the people who grew up in the Bay Area just want to stay with their own friends, and the friends that you make in San Francisco are the people you go to work with, and eventually you kind of build your tribe that way. But I will say, yeah, definitely in terms of building communities, it's so much more different. And in terms of weather, it's two extremes. San Francisco is very cold and gloomy, and it has microclimates all around the Bay Area. So you could be in South San Francisco and it's foggy all day, and then you could be in Haight-Ashbury and it's sunny. And then here in Singapore, it's hot and humid all the time, and then sometimes you get flash rains. So pick or choose what you like. But there's definitely a stark difference in weather and climate. I also just want to talk about Studio headphones. They came out with a great new pair and I was gifted them. So this is not a sponsorship at all whatsoever. I just wanted to talk about them because I know that for those who work in tech, we tend to wear a lot of earbuds or headphones, and honestly, these are decent. So this is what it looks like. This is their newest pair. They're noise canceling, they're sweat proof. and splash proof, and they're just pretty comfortable, and I love the color. So this is like the mint green one that I got. I think they're roughly around 120 Singaporean dollars, but I'm gonna definitely be using this for when I work out. The fact that they're sweat resistant and they're like super cute and easy to use. If you want a discount code, you can go ahead and click the link below and use the code. And it's so crazy that, you know, I am actually working with companies on these partnerships. And obviously dating, it's a very hot topic of all the people that like to ask me these questions. I feel like dating in Singapore, it is harder, to be honest, and you can complain or whatever at me, but I think it is harder to date in Singapore. I think, one, obviously population size is a lot smaller. People here are very transient. Again, they're moving in and out of the city-state, and a lot of them don't really want to settle down. Like, everyone kind of feels like they're on the move after 1 to 2 or 3 years. And a lot of my Asian American friends in Singapore are also considering moving home, just because, you know, it's hard, and, you know, do we really want to settle down here? Like, that's a big question that has been kind of like looming over everyone's heads. I think in the Bay Area, as a woman, it's easier to date because there's just so much more like men in the Bay Area, like a lot of engineers. This is a huge generalization, by the way, but statistically, if I were supposed to pull up stats, I'm sure that there's the ratio to like men to women is a lot like bigger in the Bay Area. And I personally just have found it easier to date in the Bay Area than here in Singapore. So that's another consideration. If you are looking to date in Singapore and you're a guy, I feel like it is easier for guys here. Well, that's what I've heard from my friend. I don't want to prescribe, so I'm going to ask a few questions that you should think about. Obviously, one is like, where do you want your network to thrive and grow? So if you're choosing between Singapore and San Francisco, you should consider like, where do you want your network to thrive? Like, where do you kind of see yourself ending up in? Like, where do you see yourself like having roots, if that makes sense to you? I think that's a pretty big factor you should think about. Is it close to things that you love, close to people that you love? Does a lifestyle seem to like vibe with you? And then other questions to consider are your comfort level. I feel like Singapore is a very beautiful place to kind of live in easily. People can just kind of fly into Singapore and adjust quite quickly. I think if people go to San Francisco, there's more like culture shock, there's more of a bigger adjustment. And I say this because, you know, there's a huge gap between the wealthy and the poor. There's a huge homelessness issue. There's like the Asian American attacks happening. I'm really not selling San Francisco at the moment, but I think I would rather you know everything up front than, you know, just be like, oh yeah, this is great. I think maybe I can talk about like the negatives of living in Singapore as well. Perhaps the fact that, you know, we're also glued very closely to our EP. So like if we get fired, you have 1 month to kind of figure out your things and then you're out of this country. So I think there's also that fear for me as an EP holder. And I know that's been super stressful for a lot of people here in Singapore during COVID. And I think that that's just like one thing that kind of like is in the back of my mind. And then the second thing too is just like breaking rules. I definitely oblige to every single rule, and I'm very cautious about what I say or what I do here in Singapore. But I remember I was like crossing the street, and then I was like following like an uncle, and I was like, oh wait, can I do this? And then I got kind of scared. So I think there's also that like that fear of doing the wrong thing without knowing you're doing the wrong thing, and then perhaps people just talking about it, or like you end up on the news. I think that's like a negative thing. And also probably the fact that Singapore is just really small. Like everyone knows everyone knows everything, everyone knows your business. And in some ways, San Francisco is like that. It is. But I think in Singapore, I felt it more heavily. And I don't know, I just feel like I'm not sure how I feel about people always knowing my business, or that the friend circles run so small. It's almost as if like you can't really escape that. And then in San Francisco, I felt like I could. So those are just things to consider. Obviously, I have so much love for the Bay Area because that's where I really grew my career. I've made some of the best friends at the startup I was at. I've met my favorite manager who's just been super incredible in my career growth and who's been like the one pushing me to be a better person. San Francisco, as much as I kind of just shat on it, I know it's changing and evolving. There's a lot of issues to be cleaned up, but it is part of Silicon Valley. It's Bay Area. There's a lot of beauty in it. There's a lot of concerts. There's a lot of great food. There's a lot of vibrancy and culture and color that the Bay Area has. And so I really appreciate that part. And in Singapore, it's safe and quaint, and you get this beautiful mix of culture and vibrancy that you can't see in other countries. I've met some of the most incredible, well-rounded, smart people here, and I love that it's not homogenous. I meet people who are in law, who are dietitians, who are account managers, who work in various different industries, not just tech. And I think being here in Singapore has shown me that you can be very entrepreneurial. You can start your own thing, whether it's a bakery or you own a bar, or it's just, Singapore has shown me so many different ways to live and shown me different lifestyles I can have, especially meeting some of my friends who are mothers and have kids and they're doing their own startup, or they're just traveling in Singapore and they're gonna be moving their family and picking up every 2 years. So I think in terms of understanding the tech ecosystem, San Francisco was great for that. And then in terms of showing me the type of life I could have and live, Singapore was great for that as well. But to kind of round out this conversation, because I know I've been talking a lot, I think you should really consider both. If you can work and live in both, even better. But I think if you are really wanting to kind of grow your early career in tech, I think San Francisco is a great place to do that. If you are looking to become an entrepreneur and expand a business and grow out, an office in this market and to have more impact as a seasoned manager or professional, Singapore is great for that as well. So yeah, I mean, do consider these pros and cons. Obviously, all of this is from my own experience, and I'm quite blunt and transparent. I just want you to take what you can absorb from this conversation. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them or perhaps make another video out of it. I'm also wearing my tech hoodie from OmniSci, a startup I used to work at, and so in the spirit of this conversation, I am wearing it. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing more tech videos like this because I get so many questions about it. If you want to follow along, just click subscribe and like this for the algorithm. Thank you, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.